Visit Sailrite.com for your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
Hi, I'm Eric Grant with Sailrite. In today's tutorial video, we're going to show you how to make a cover for an electric motor. This cover has shock cord in the sleeve, and it just comes off easily like that. And to put it on, just start it from the back and pull it over the top like that, and it's installed. This cover is made from a marine grade cover fabric that's available from Sailrite. You can pick your own. And let's get started and show you how to make it.
In this first chapter, we'll be measuring our motor and cutting the fabric to size.
We're not going to use pattern material to create the cover for this. We're actually just going to take the fabric, which I've laid down. This is a marine grade fabric available from Sailrite. And we're going to take our electric motor and hold it up like this on the fabric, and we're going to trace around this. So this is going to be our top plate. Now what I want to do is I want to be a little bit outside. I don't want to be straight up and down. I want to be a little bit outside by about a ½ inch around the perimeter. So that's why I'm holding my pin kind of out at a almost 45-degree angle as I mark around it. So I'm going to do this all around. So we're going to cut on that line, and if there's any inconsistencies, I'll kind of smooth it out as I cut. So if my line went off a little bit, I'm just going to make it a nice smooth transition. No reason to use a hot knife. This fabric actually has a urethane coating on the backside. There are several brands that will work well. Just look up your favorite marine grade cover fabric at Sailrite.com. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a banding around the sides. Now, how much you want to cover is totally up to you. Obviously, there's not as much material to cover up here, but there's quite a bit down here. As long as the cover comes down over here, I'm probably happy. But I think I'm going to go all the way down to here to measure. So my banding, when done, can be anywhere from 4 to 5 inches. As you can see, I'm measuring from the top down to about here. I think what I'm going to do for seam allowance and so forth, I'm just going to make that banding 6 inches. That'll mean that it'll cover almost all of this, and then there'll be extra fabric over here, but the top plate is fairly tight. So I think I'm going to make my banding about 6 inches. That should include a ½ inch for seam allowance to sew it to the plate, and it will also include an extra inch for a sleeve where we will have shock cord around the perimeter to hold it on tightly here. So in the end, it'll end up being probably around 4.5 to 5 inches. So now we need to basically measure around, and I'll just measure from the middle position of the handle to the back, and I get about 21 inches. Multiply that times 2, that would be 42. I think I'm going to cut a band that is about 46 just to be safe. Nice thing is the clear acrylic ruler is 6 inches wide, which makes this pretty nice. I want this to be straight, so I'm just going to mark the fabric down to 46 inches, and we'll cut it out with scissors.
Coming up, we'll be sewing the hem and sleeve.
This is our banding, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it so the urethane side is up, and we're going to create a V for the opening of the shock cord. So I'm going to measure over 1.5 inches. Mark the underside of the marine grade fabric that you can buy from Sailrite, and mark a line. We're going to cut on that line, and we are going to create a 1-inch hem, single hem. You can do a double hem if you'd like, but a single hem works great for a cover like this, especially with a fabric that has a urethane coating. Even Top Notch 9 works great for this, and I would not do a double hem for that. So we're going to fold this over to approximately 1 inch, and then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine. We're going to cut off this dog ear, and we're going to sew right down that. This is the long side, and this is the short side. At the bottom, we're going to have a 1-inch sleeve for shock cord. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my clear acrylic ruler and mark 2 inches up so it can fold to this line to create the 1-inch sleeve. And after that's done, I'm going to put double-sided tape on here right along this raw edge, and then I'm going to put the shock cord, and I'm going to use an 1/8 inch shock cord. I think that works great for a small cover like this. Tensions it well. I'm going to place the 1/8 inch shock cord in that fold and peel off the transfer paper. And then what we'll do is, and you can see the shock cord's longer than our actual sleeve, which is actually too long. I'm going to push my finger in here to make sure that it's at the fold, and we will fold it to that line all the way down its length. Now, and then we'll take it to the sewing machine and we'll sew this, and we'll show that. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to sew with this foot up against this raw edge. That way the double-sided tape won't be exposed to our shock cord. So I'm going to push it there. So see how this foot's up against this edge. And then I'm going to put the magnetic guide on here just so that I could sew quickly. This is the side without the hem, so this is the side that'll be cut short. So no reversing is necessary here. Now all I have to do is just keep it up against the guide as I sew, making sure I don't sew through my shock cord. And when we get to the other end, we'll do some reversing. We'll show that in a second. Okay, when we get to this end, we want to make sure it's secured well. So we will just sew up to there and do a lot of reversing there, and we are done with that.
In this chapter, we'll be sewing our top plate to the skirt.
This is the right side. There's our hems are facing down. So we're going to start sewing, and this is the wrong side. So we want right sides facing each other. We're going to start at the back of this. It doesn't really matter, but that's where I've chosen to do it. So I'm going to match this up. Oh, I need to move this at a 1/2 inch, the magnetic guide, 1/2 inch seam allowance or a little bit less. And we're going to do sewing here. And I'm not going to do any reversing because we will be sewing over that spot here in a little bit. We're going to sew around here and pull the fabric because I've got my banding on the bottom side, which is easier to do than having it on the top side, though it could be done on the top. And I'm going to pull this over. So this is pretty easy. Now when we get to the end of the handle, it's going to be a little bit trickier. So we'll show you what we do when we get there. Okay, so now we're at the handle. I can cut slits in the banding, or I can cut slits in this. This is what's going to take the turn. It's on top. So I'm just going to cut some slits actually in the top plate where it has a lot of curve. And I'm not going to go deeper than my seam allowance. And I'm going to put them about a 1/4 inch or less next to each other. And this will help us to take that turn. We're going to stop right about here where the transition changes, and we're going to sew this on. Hopefully my hands aren't going to get in the way. I love using these pliers to match things up. Sometimes I just hold both my materials. I'm going to turn down the worker bee power pack system so I get optimal slow speed control right here. And if I need to make changes, I'm going to make sure my needle's buried, and I'm going to try to pivot a little bit more on this so a really sharp turn. There we go. Just don't forget to lower your foot when you do that. Try to get that wrinkle out there. There we go. Okay, we're around. I'm going to turn up my speed again because I can sew pretty quick doing this, matching up fairly straightaways. Okay, we're coming to the spot where we began, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a little bit of reversing here, just 1 stitch or so, just to make sure that it doesn't come loose, and then I'm going to take it to the table and show you what you do here. I'm going to walk this around as though I were sewing it to where this one intersects, and I'm going to mark it with my pencil. And then we need to at least 1 inch of fabric, but I want it to overlap as well. So I'm actually going to do a couple inches of fabric here. So right there, that way it'll sew over top of the other one at the top. Okay, we're going to create a V here as well, which means I'm going to have to rip up these stitches, which I expected, and I'm going to rip them up approximately 3 inches or so back from the edge so that I can not cut through my shock cord, and I can create a single hem here. So we're going to open this up. That gets the shock cord out of the way. Let's go ahead and mark this straight down. I mean, I can tell that it's what, half, 3/4 of an inch? Yeah, 3/4 of an inch. So 3/4 of an inch is here. Because we're going to cut off this excess. Remember, we included some extra in here. No. So I'm going to cut that off. That's where our mark is. And now I'm going to create that V by measuring over 1.5 inches, just like we did with the other V, which is right here. Mark that. And then we come from this corner to that locale, and we strike a line. And we want to make sure that we don't cut our shock cord as we do this. There we go, there's the V. And now I'm going to take double-sided tape. We can clean these stitches up. I'll do that here in a minute. And we're going to create a 1 inch hem here and sew it. So we'll peel off the transfer paper like that. And I'm going to look for approximately 1 inch, which looks like about like that. And we're going to fold it all the way to here. I may need to rip a few more stitches, and we're going to sew across here. Okay, so here is our hem. We're going to just turn it over, and we're going to sew this. I'm going to do a little bit of reversing there. We're going to make sure that we don't sew through our shock cord. Now this has a little wrinkle in it. I'm going to try to straighten it out here. And a little bit of reversing there. Okay, so we got that done. Now we're going to close up that seam that we opened up. So we're going to flip it over to this side, and oops, I'm going to make sure I don't pull my shock cord through. I'm going to fold that down. We're going to start sewing. I'm going to move that out of the way over top of our previous stitches by a few inches, and do a little teeny bit of reversing. And sew to the end, and reverse here. Okay, good. I'm going to put the magnetic guide back at our approximate 1/2 inch location, and we're going to finish sewing this up. So I'm going to put it in the machine and sew over our previous stitches by a few inches. A little bit of reversing to make sure they don't pull out. And these should overlap slightly. Let's see if they do. Probably should have cut that dog ear off. I'm going to ignore that it's there. I got to make sure this goes flat, like that. And then once we get to our stitches, we want to make sure that we do some reversing here. I'm sewing the reversing into the seam allowance, which will never be visible. And let's see what we got. So we have a little V in the back, and it's going to look good for the front. Now we're going to do a top stitch.
Up next, adding a top stitch to our cover.
So we're turning it right side out, and we're pressing all the corners out. And then you can decide to do this top stitch or not to do the top stitch. I think it looks good, but it doesn't have to be done. Okay, you can stop. we're going to use one of the left side of the center foot as our guide and keep the stitch at that location. So now this stitch is, everyone's going to see this stitch. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to pull the fabric apart and make sure my seam allowance is on the right side, and sew rather slowly. In fact, I'm going to turn down the worker bee power pack system to really slow speed so that I can be really accurate. Is that necessary? No, it's not, but it does make it a lot easier to create a beautiful top stitch. So we're going to do this all around. Now when I get to the handle part, the really thin part that takes a large turn, we'll probably show that because that's more complicated. So we'll come back when we get that point. So we're getting closer to that end of the handle here. And when you get to those kind of locations, you just want to spread out your material an inch or two before you start sewing, because it's going to be really tight. And try to make sure your needle's buried when you're doing the adjusting of the fabric. So I'm going to try to flatten it so that you can see it better for the camera. So notice how I'm just kind of pulling the fabric both left and right. Needle's buried. That way it doesn't move while I'm doing this. And I'm pulling the fabric. The seam allowance is still in the right way. Trying to flatten it with my fingers like I did. And I'll sew really slow, maybe just a couple stitches as we sew around this area. So this is the time consumer because of the fact that it's really sharp turn. All right, we're around it. That wasn't hard at all. We'll show you what it looks like when we're done. So we're coming to where we began, and I figured I should show this. I'm going to cut that stitch, and I'm just going to go over those stitches, trying to be in line with them, and do a little bit of reversing here. And that should do it for our top stitch. So we still have our shock cord coming out. What we're going to do is we're going to pull some shock cord out and actually tie a knot, and this will be permanently tied in place, and we just pull it to put it on the cover. So I put the motor on a table, and here's how our cover fits on. And what we need to do now is pull the shock cord. So I'm going to shrink up the bottom side by doing this, and you can do it to whatever tension you like to make it easy to install the cover. I think that'll work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a knot at this locale, and I can always take it out if it's too much or too little. Let's just see what we got. So does that work for our cover? And is it easy to get off? It's difficult enough to get off that I don't think it'll come off in a windstorm, but you can tension it to whatever you'd like, and really it does a phenomenal job of covering it. I think I'm going to go a little bit tighter with this, and you might want to just create some wrinkles in this and distribute them to get it as tight as you want. Let's just tighten it a little bit more. So I think we have our tension about right. You can cut it with scissors. You can also cut it with a hot knife. The problem is there are rubber bands inside here, so they're going to stink like crazy. But the nice thing that the hot knife does is it kind of melts the ends of the outer core of the shock cord, so it keeps them from unraveling. And so now we have a cover, and we're going to just leave that there. That'll always be tension that fits nice and tight. It's no way the wind's going to blow it off, and yet to remove it, all I do is this, which comes off. And to put it back on, do this, pull it over the top, and I can leave my motor out in inclement weather, and it's protected from the sun and even the rain, even though it's waterproof.
And finally, a list of the materials and tools we used to complete this project. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call or email. We're glad to help. From all of us at Sailrite, I'm Seth Grant. Thanks for watching.